Meadowbrook Children's Home sat on 5 acres of land just outside the city, a sprawling complex that had been built in the 1950s. The main building was painted a cheerful yellow, though the paint was peeling in places, and the playground equipment showed signs of age and heavy use. On any given day, about 40 children called Meadowbrook home, waiting and hoping for families to choose them. 7-year-old Alice Bennett had been at Meadowbrook for 3 years, ever since her parents died in a house fire. She'd survived but sustained injuries that left her unable to walk. Now she spent her days in a wheelchair, a permanent resident in a place where most children eventually left for new families. Alice had long ago accepted that she would never be chosen. She'd watched dozens of prospective parents come through Meadowbrook's doors, seen them interact with the other children, watched them leave with a new son or daughter in tow, but no one ever looked at her twice. The wheelchair, she understood, made her invisible. Or worse, it made her visible in the wrong way, as a problem, a responsibility too heavy to take on. On this particular afternoon, Alice sat in her usual spot under the large oak tree at the edge of the playground. She wore a pink dress with a white collar that Mrs. Henderson, the home's director, insisted all the girls wear when visitors were expected. In her lap sat her constant companion, a well-worn teddy bear named George that had somehow survived the fire. Behind her, the other children played soccer on the lawn, their shouts and laughter filling the air. They rarely invited her to play anymore. At first, when she'd arrived, they'd tried to include her, but wheelchairs don't work well on grass, and Alice had tired of being the scorekeeper or the cheerleader. Eventually, they'd stopped asking, and she'd stopped expecting. Today was adoption day, the twice-monthly event when prospective parents came to meet the children. Alice had learned to make herself scarce during these visits. It was easier to sit alone with George than to be passed over again and again while watching other children light up with hope as they were chosen. She was watching a bird hop across the grass when she heard the car pull up. A sleek black vehicle, expensive-looking, the kind that whispered rather than roared. Alice watched with detached curiosity as a man stepped out. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with brown hair that was slightly too long, giving him a more casual air than his impeccably tailored charcoal suit suggested. He stood for a moment, studying the building, then noticed the children playing. His expression was difficult to read, something between hope and apprehension. Mrs. Henderson hurried out to greet him, her hands fluttering nervously the way they always did around wealthy visitors. Alice was too far away to hear their conversation, but she saw Mrs. Henderson gesturing toward the main building, clearly intending to give him the standard tour. But the man shook his head and pointed toward the playground. Mrs. Henderson looked flustered but nodded, following as he walked across the lawn. Alice watched as he approached the group of children. They stopped their game, suddenly shy in the presence of this stranger. He knelt down, bringing himself to their level, and started talking with them. Several children edged closer, drawn by his friendly manner. He laughed at something one of the boys said, his face transforming with genuine amusement. Then his eyes swept across the playground and landed on Alice. She was used to people's gazes sliding past her, their eyes registering the wheelchair and then quickly looking away. But this man didn't look away. He held her gaze for a long moment, then stood and walked directly toward her. Alice felt her heart begin to beat faster. She hugged George tighter, unsure what to expect. People didn't usually seek her out. The man approached and knelt down beside her wheelchair, a slight smile on his face. "Hello?" he said. His voice was warm, with a hint of something. Sadness, maybe? "I'm Daniel. Daniel Morrison. What's your name?" "Alice," she said quietly, then added, "Alice Bennett." "It's nice to meet you, Alice Bennett. And who's this?" He gestured to the teddy bear. "George." "George," Daniel repeated seriously. "That's a distinguished name for a bear. How long have you known George?" "He's been with me since before." "Since the fire!" Alice wasn't sure why she was telling him this. Usually she kept these details to herself. Daniel's expression softened. "I'm sorry. That must have been very hard." Alice shrugged, a gesture she'd perfected, one that said it was okay even when it wasn't. "It was a long time ago." 3 years, Daniel said, and Alice realized he must have read her file. "You were 4 years old. That's not so long." "It feels long." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the other children resume their game. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "Can I ask you something, Alice? Why are you sitting here by yourself instead of playing with the others?" Alice looked down at her wheelchair. "They don't really need me in their games." "Did they tell you that?" "They don't have to. I'm in a wheelchair. I can't run or kick a ball or climb on the jungle gym. I'm just in the way." Daniel was quiet, considering her words. "You know what I think? I think you're only in the way if you believe you are." "Have they actually said they don't want you to play?" "Well, no, but then maybe they're waiting for you to ask. Or maybe they need someone to think of different games, ones that work for everyone. Have you ever tried that?" Alice hadn't thought of it that way. She'd been so focused on what she couldn't do that she'd never considered what she could. "Can I tell you a secret?" Daniel said, leaning in conspiratorially. "I came here today to meet children, maybe to adopt one. And do you know what? Every single child I've talked to told me about what they're good at, what they want to be when they grow up, how they'd be a great addition to a family. But you're the first one who's just been honest, real. That takes courage." Alice felt something warm spreading in her chest. "Really? Really, you didn't try to impress me or perform for me. You're just you. That's special, Alice." Mrs. Henderson approached them, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you'd wandered off. Alice, dear, why don't you go inside?" "Mr. Morrison, let me show you some of our other children." "Actually," Daniel said, standing but keeping his attention on Alice, "I'd like to spend more time talking with Alice, if that's all right." Mrs. Henderson looked flustered. "Oh, well, of course, but Mr. Morrison, perhaps I should explain. Alice is a wonderful child, but she does have special needs. The wheelchair requires modifications to a home, regular physical therapy, doctor's appointments. Most families find it challenging, perhaps. I could introduce you to some of our other girls. Maggie over there is 7, very bright, no medical issues." "I'd like to talk with Alice," Daniel said firmly, a note of steel entering his voice that suggested he wasn't used to being argued with. Mrs. Henderson wilted slightly. "Of course, Mr. Morrison, I'll be in my office if you need anything." She walked away, throwing worried glances over her shoulder. Daniel turned back to Alice with a rueful smile. "Sorry about that. Shall we take a walk, or would you prefer to stay here?" "We could go to the garden," Alice said shyly. "It's quiet there. Lead the way." Alice pushed herself along the paved path that led to the small garden behind the main building. Daniel walked beside her, matching his pace to hers, his hands in his pockets. He didn't offer to push her wheelchair, which Alice appreciated. Adults always wanted to push, as if she couldn't manage on her own. The garden was Alice's favorite place at Meadowbrook. Someone had planted roses years ago, and though they weren't carefully maintained, they still bloomed every summer. There was a small bench and a bird bath, and the sound of traffic was muted here. They settled into a companionable silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Can I ask you a question, Alice? What do you dream about? When you think about the future, what do you see?" No one had ever asked her that before. The adults at Meadowbrook focused on her limitations, on managing expectations, on preparing her for a life in the system since adoption seemed unlikely. But dreams? Those were personal things she kept tucked away in her heart. "I want to help animals," she said after a moment. "Like a veterinarian." "Animals don't care if you're in a wheelchair. They just care if you're kind to them." Daniel smiled. "That's a beautiful dream." "You know, I think you'd be an excellent veterinarian." "Mrs. Henderson says I should be realistic," Alice said quietly. "She says I need to think about jobs I can do from a wheelchair." Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, doesn't know what she's talking about. "Do you know how many people with disabilities are doctors and scientists and teachers and artists? Being in a wheelchair doesn't limit what you can become. It just means you might have to work harder or find different ways of doing things. But if you want to be a veterinarian, Alice, you absolutely can be." Alice felt tears prickling her eyes. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone believe in her. They talked for over an hour, about animals and books and Alice's life before the fire. Daniel told her about his work. He was CEO of a tech company, though Alice didn't fully understand what that meant. About his large house that felt too empty. About how he'd been thinking about adoption for years but had kept putting it off. "Why did you finally decide to come?" Alice asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I lost someone very important to me, he said finally. My wife, Sarah. She died 2 years ago from cancer. We'd always planned to have children, but we kept waiting for the right time. And then she got sick and suddenly there was no more time. Before she died, she made me promise that I wouldn't let grief stop me from living, that I'd still build the family we dreamed about, even if she couldn't be here to see it. I'm sorry, Alice said softly. About your wife. Thank you. I think she would have liked you very much. She always said the best people were the ones who'd been through hard things and came out still able to be kind. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Henderson came to find them, reminding Daniel that visiting hours were ending. He stood reluctantly. Alice, I'd like to come back and visit you again. If that would be okay with you. Alice nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She'd learned not to hope too much. But something in Daniel's eyes made it impossible not to feel. A tiny spark of possibility. Over the next month, Daniel visited every weekend. He brought books about veterinary medicine and animals. He told her stories about his childhood, about the dog he'd had named Chester, about the time he'd tried to bring home a stray cat and his mother had made him return it to its owner. He also started bringing specialists, doctors who examined Alice's legs and spine, physical therapists who assessed her mobility. Alice didn't understand why at first, until Daniel sat down with her one afternoon and explained. Alice, I know this might seem sudden, but I've been thinking a lot over the past month. I came to Meadowbrook looking to adopt a child, and I found exactly who I was looking for. You. I'd like you to come live with me, to be my daughter if you'd want that. Alice felt her world tilt. But the wheelchair. I need so much help. I need physical therapy and special equipment and I know. I've been consulting with doctors to understand exactly what you need. My house can be modified for accessibility. I can hire a physical therapist to come work with you several times a week. I can make sure you get to all your doctor's appointments. None of that is a problem. Alice, the only question that matters is whether you'd want me to be your father. Why me? Alice whispered. All the other children are easier. They can run and play and don't need special things. Daniel reached out and gently took her hand. Alice, I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for you. From the moment I saw you sitting under that tree with George, something just felt right. And every conversation we've had since then has only confirmed it. You're smart and brave and honest and kind. You see the world differently than other people, and I think that's wonderful. The wheelchair isn't who you are, Alice. It's just how you get around. And yes, it will mean making some accommodations. But so what? Every child needs something different. You need ramps and physical therapy. Another child might need help with reading or managing, anxiety or learning a second language. We all need different things. That doesn't make you less worthy of a family. He squeezed her hand gently. I want you, Alice, not despite the wheelchair. And not because of some savior complex. I want you because you're you, because I think we could be good for each other. Because I have a big empty house and you have a big heart, and maybe together we could build something special. What do you say? Alice looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity. No pity, no reluctance, no fear, just love. The kind of love she'd thought she'd lost forever in the fire that took her parents. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that very much. The adoption process took 6 months. During that time, Daniel visited several times a week, bringing her to his house for weekend visits so she could get used to her new home. True to his word, he had the house modified, ramps installed, doorways widened, a bathroom on the ground floor fitted with grab bars and a roll-in shower. Her bedroom was on the first floor, spacious and bright, with bookshelves already stocked with books about animals and adventure. The other children at Meadowbrook couldn't believe it. Mrs. Henderson seemed perpetually surprised, as if she expected Daniel to change his mind at any moment. But he never wavered. He showed up when he said he would. He called every evening to say goodnight. He made it clear that Alice was his choice, his daughter, the family he'd been waiting for. On the day the adoption was finalized, Daniel knelt down beside Alice's wheelchair in the courthouse hallway. Ready to go home, daughter? Alice felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. Ready, Dad? The first year was an adjustment. Alice had to learn to trust that this was permanent, that Daniel wasn't going to change his mind or send her back. Daniel had to learn the rhythms of parenting, how to braid hair, not well, but Alice appreciated the effort. How to help with homework, how to advocate for Alice at her new school. They also continued her physical therapy intensively. The doctors Daniel had consulted believed that, with proper therapy and possibly some surgeries, Alice might regain some mobility. It wouldn't be a miracle cure. She'd likely always need mobility aids. But there was hope for improvement. The day Alice took her first steps with a walker, 18 months after coming home, Daniel cried. He'd worked with her every day, encouraging her through the painful therapy sessions, never pushing too hard, but never letting her give up either. "I did it, Dad," Alice said, her legs shaking with the effort of standing. "You did it," Daniel agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Alice, so incredibly proud." But he was careful to add, "And I would have been just as proud if you'd stayed in the wheelchair forever." This isn't about fixing you or making you better. You were perfect the way you were. This is about giving you more options, more independence. But you don't have to prove anything to me or to anyone else. As Alice grew older, Daniel made good on his promise to help her pursue her dreams. When she was 12, he helped her volunteer at a local animal shelter. When she was 15, she shadowed a veterinarian during summer break. When she applied to college, she wrote her essay about a man who'd seen past, a wheelchair to the person underneath, who'd taught her that disability was just one part of who she was, not a definition or a limitation. At her high school graduation, Alice, now able to walk with forearm crutches and occasionally using a wheelchair for longer distances, gave a speech. She looked out at the audience and spotted Daniel in the third row, his eyes already glistening with tears. 7 years ago, Alice began, I was a little girl in a wheelchair who no one wanted. I was invisible at best, a burden at worst. I'd accepted that. I would spend my childhood in an orphanage and age out of the system at 18. I had no hope, no future, no family. She paused, gathering her thoughts. And then a man came to Meadowbrook, children's home. He walked past all the children who were running and playing, past all the kids who would have been easy to adopt. And he sat down next to a sad little girl under a tree and asked her name. That man, my dad, taught me that I wasn't invisible, that my wheelchair didn't define my worth, that I deserved a family just as much as anyone else. Alice looked directly at Daniel. Dad, you saved my life, not by fixing me or curing me or making the disability go away. You saved my life by seeing me, by choosing me, by loving me exactly as I was. You taught me that my dreams were possible, that my limitations were just obstacles to be overcome or worked around, not reasons to give up. You gave me a home and a future and, most importantly, a family. She wiped her eyes. To my fellow graduates, some of you have had easy paths, some have had hard ones. Some of you have disabilities, some have other challenges. But I want you to know, you are not defined by the hardest thing about you. You are defined by your courage, your kindness, your resilience. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you that you're less than you are. You are enough exactly as you are. And if you're lucky, you'll find people who see that the way my dad saw it in me. After the ceremony, Daniel hugged Alice tightly. I'm so proud of you, he said. But you know you had it backwards in your speech. What do you mean? You said I saved you. But Alice, you saved me. After Sarah died, I was just going through the motions. I had money and success, but no purpose, no joy. And then I met a little girl in a pink dress holding a teddy bear. And she gave me a reason to live again. You made me a father. You made our house a home. You taught me what really matters. So thank you, daughter, for choosing me back. Alice went on to veterinary school just as she'd dreamed. It was challenging, the long hours of standing, the physical demands of the work. But she found ways to manage. She specialized in rehabilitative care for injured animals, drawing on her own experiences with disability and recovery. The day she opened her own practice, Daniel was there, cutting the ribbon. The clinic was fully accessible, designed to accommodate both human and animal patients with disabilities. Alice had made it her mission to help animals, that other vets considered too difficult or expensive to treat, the animals that were overlooked just as she once had been. A reporter asked Alice what inspired her work. She smiled and pointed to Daniel. My dad taught me that everyone deserves a chance. That being different doesn't mean being less than. That with the right support and someone who believes in you, anything is possible. I'm just applying,